Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always exciting to jump into these.
So today we're going to be taking a look at how we see ourselves.
Okay.
And then kind of the flip side of that, how we present ourselves to the world.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at this through the lens of the book Social Cognition, The Construction of the Self in Social Contexts.
By Aline Gavriluk.
By Aline Gavriluk.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how these two things kind of play off of each other.
Right.
Because, I mean, I know for me personally, I feel like I act a little differently depending on who I'm with.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what Gavriluk is getting at, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in this chapter, he kind of explores this idea that our self-identity, it really is formed through our interactions with others.
Okay.
And so he references this idea of Cooley's looking glass self-theory.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's this idea that we kind of develop this self-image by trying to see ourselves as others see us.
So we're constantly like looking for feedback
Totally.
from the people around us to kind of figure out who we are.
Yeah. And he says that this starts really early on, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like with our primary groups,
Okay.
or our family and close friends,
Right.
those become kind of like the first mirrors.
Oh, interesting.
Reflecting back to us, what they see, the values, the behavior.
That makes total sense. I know, like growing up, my parents, they really drilled into me the importance of honesty.
Uh-huh.
So I always felt like I was a very honest person, someone with integrity.
Right. And that's a perfect example of how those early interactions really shape how we see ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And then, as we move beyond those primary groups, we start to encounter new mirrors, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Different social contexts.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly kind of adjusting, refining that self-image.
It's like you're adding more and more mirrors
Totally.
to the funhouse.
Totally.
To kind of distort that image even more.
Yeah. And, but then Gavriluk, he also brings up another interesting point here.
Okay.
He references this, famous axiom by W.I. Thomas.
Oh, I think I remember this one.
If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences.
Okay, yeah, I remember that.
That quote, but how does that relate to how we see ourselves,
Yeah, what's the connection there?
Well, I think what he's getting at is it emphasizes this whole idea of the meaning we attach to our actions.
Okay.
Particularly in social situations.
Okay.
So let's say, you make a mistake at work, right?
Oh, the worst.
If you interpret that mistake as a sign that you're incompetent,
Right.
that's going to ramage your self-perception,
Yeah.
But if you view it as a learning opportunity,
Right.
it might actually strengthen your self-image.
So it's not just about the experience itself?
No.
It's about how we interpret it.
Totally.
Okay.
Right. And this kind of ties into another theory that he talks about, Daryl Bem's self-perception theory.
I've heard of that one too, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so Bem suggested that we often don't have direct access to, like, our internal states or feelings.
Oh, interesting.
So we actually observe our own behavior.
Okay.
And then we draw inferences about who we are.
So we're almost like detectives of our own self.
Totally.
That's really tricky when you think about it.
Right. Like in the book, he uses the example of someone who starts going to the gym regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they didn't initially consider themselves athletic,
Right.
that repeated behavior of going to the gym
Yeah.
might lead them to see themselves as a fitness-oriented person.
So you're saying that our actions can actually change how we see ourselves?
Exactly.
Even if we don't initially believe it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Right.
I like that.
It's powerful stuff.
So we've been talking a lot about how we form our self-perception.
Right.
But what about how we present ourselves to others?
Yeah, so that's where self-presentation comes in.
Okay.
And according to Gavriluk, this is all about strategically projecting this desired image to other people.
So it's kind of like we're putting on a show?
Yeah, in a way. And he outlines 4 main motives for this.
4. Okay.
Yeah, the search for self-esteem,
Okay.
strategic self-presentation,
Got it.
self-verification,
Okay.
and the search for truth about oneself.
Whoa, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
We can break those down.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, the search for self-esteem, that's pretty straightforward, right?
Okay.
We want to feel good about ourselves.
Of course.
And one way to do that is to get approval and validation from others.
Right, so we present ourselves in a positive light.
Exactly. We highlight our strengths, our accomplishments, all that good stuff.
So it's like we're trying to kind of boost our own self-worth
Yeah.
by getting that external validation.
Totally.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then there's strategic self-presentation.
Okay, what's that one about?
So that's more about tailoring our image to achieve specific goals.
Okay.
So imagine, you're going on a job interview.
Right.
You're probably going to emphasize your work ethic, your leadership skill.
You're putting your best foot forward.
Exactly. So you can impress that potential employer.
It's almost like you're playing a role in a way,
Yeah, you could say that.
right? You're kind of adapting to the situation
Right.
to get what you want.
Exactly, but it's not always about being manipulative or anything, you
Okay.
know? Sometimes it's just about, like you said, putting your best foot forward.
Right, making a good first impression.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then self-verification.
Okay, this one's a little more interesting.
This is where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
It's not about seeking positive feedback,
Okay.
but rather confirming our existing self-image,
Okay.
even if that image is negative.
So you're saying people might actually want to get feedback that confirms negative beliefs about themselves.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, why would anyone do that?
So Gottschalk actually points to research
Okay.
that shows that people crave this consistency in their self-concept.
Oh, that's interesting.
So even if someone sees themselves as shy or awkward,
Uh-huh.
they might unconsciously behave in ways that elicit those same perceptions from others.
It's like they're almost reinforcing that image
Exactly.
that they have of themselves.
Yeah, it's all about maintaining that stable sense of self.
Okay, so even if that sense of self isn't super positive,
Right.
they still want to hold on to it.
They want to hold on to it.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So then what about that last motive?
Yeah.
The search for truth about oneself.
Yeah, so this one I think is probably the most authentic motive.
Okay.
It's about genuinely seeking feedback,
Uh-huh.
self-reflection, to gain a more accurate understanding of ourselves.
So it's like you're peeling back the layers
Yeah,
of that self-presentation
totally.
to get to the core of who you really are.
Exactly. And this can be challenging, right?
Yeah, I bet.
Because it requires us to be vulnerable and honest with ourselves.
Well-
But it's also incredibly rewarding because it can lead to personal growth
Right.
and, you know, more genuine connections with others.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm kind of curious, are there any potential pitfalls to self-presentation?
Totally. And that's something that Gavriluk actually addresses in the next part of the chapter.
Oh, perfect.
He warns against becoming overly preoccupied with how others perceive us
Okay.
because it can actually lead to inauthenticity
Right.
and a disconnect from our true selves.
It's like you're so busy crafting the perfect image
Yeah,
that you lose touch with who you actually are underneath.
exactly. And this can lead to a whole host of problems,
Yeah,
you know,
I bet.
from low self-esteem to anxiety, even depression.
So there's like a dark side to this.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll dive deep into there in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so this has been a really fascinating exploration so far.
Yeah,
I'm already starting to kind of see these concepts playing out in my own life
right.
and my own interactions with others.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And I think understanding these processes, it could be really empowering.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm really excited to continue this conversation
Me too.
and dive even deeper into this topic in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us so far, and we'll see you next time.
See you later. Welcome back to our deep dive into self-perception and self-presentation.
We're still hanging out with Alain Gavriluk and his book, Social Cognition.
Right, still exploring all those fascinating dynamics.
Yeah, and specifically today, I think it'd be interesting to kind of look at how we actively try to shape how other people see us.
Okay, yeah,
Like beyond just reacting to how they perceive us,
right.
but actually taking steps
Yeah.
to project a certain identity.
You're talking about what Gavriluk calls self-identification efforts?
Oh, okay.
So it's basically all about establishing our desired identity in the eyes of others.
So it's not just about how we see ourselves, but how we actively try to demonstrate that to the world.
Exactly. And for those efforts to be effective, Gavriluk says there's kind of two things that need to happen.
Okay.
One is they need to help us achieve our goals.
Okay, so it has to be practical.
Right, but also they need to create a believable self-image.
Okay, so you can't just project any random identity.
Yeah, it has to be somewhat grounded in reality.
So it's like a balancing act between authenticity and the image we want to project.
Absolutely. And this kind of ties into another interesting point that Gavriluk brings up.
What's that?
He talks about this desire for power and influence in social relationships.
Oh, yeah?
And he says it's almost universal.
Well, yeah, I mean, we all want to feel like we have some control
Right.
over how other people see us.
Exactly. And he references some really fascinating research by Cialdini.
Oh, yeah, the influence guy.
Yeah, exactly. That shows how we tend to align ourselves with people who are successful
Oh, that's so true.
and distance ourselves from those who have failed.
It's like you want to soak up the
Yeah,
good vibes of success,
totally.
even if it's not your own.
Exactly. And according to Gavriluk, this tendency is even stronger in people who struggle with low self-esteem.
So it's kind of like a way to boost their self-worth by association?
You could say that, but this whole desire for social advantage, it can also lead to some, less admirable tactics.
Oh, I bet. Like putting other people down to make yourself look better.
Yeah, that's one way. He talks about how we might downplay the achievements of our rivals.
Uh-huh.
Say things like, oh, well, their success was just luck, or they had outside help.
Right, so you're kind of protecting your own ego
Yeah.
by diminishing their accomplishments.
And this brings us to something called downward comparison.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so basically it's comparing ourselves to people who are worse off than us.
Right, just to make yourself feel better.
Exactly. And, it can be helpful in certain situations, Gavrlik points out. Like, for example, someone who's coping with a serious illness
Uh-huh.
might compare themselves to someone with a more severe case. And that can actually provide a sense of perspective.
It's like, okay, well, it could be worse.
Exactly. But Gavrlik also cautions that relying too much on downward comparison, it can actually prevent us from growing.
Right, because you're just settling
Yeah.
for being better than someone else.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance,
Okay.
recognizing our strengths, but also acknowledging where we can improve.
So that's when someone else, maybe not doing so well.
Right.
But what about when someone close to us is actually doing really well? How do we manage that?
So Gavrlik discusses this concept called self-evaluation maintenance.
Okay.
It was a model developed by Abraham Tesser,
Okay.
and it basically describes two main ways we react to the successes of close others.
Okay.
Either by basking in reflected glory
Okay.
or experiencing social comparison jealousy.
Those sound pretty opposite.
They are.
Yeah.
So when we bask, we feel this genuine pride and joy for the other person.
Okay.
Especially if it's someone we admire. It's like their achievements become an extension of our own self-worth.
Like when your best friend lands their dream job
Yeah,
and you're just so thrilled for them.
perfect example.
You're celebrating their win.
But then there's that flip side, the comparison jealousy, where we feel this envy, this threat.
Yeah, their win feels like your loss.
Exactly, and it makes us question our own abilities.
Totally.
And according to Tesser, which reaction we have, it really depends on how relevant the other person's success is to our own self-concept.
So if they're doing well in something that you also care about,
Right.
then you're more likely to feel jealous.
Exactly. But if their achievement is in an area we don't really care much about,
Yeah.
we're more likely to just be happy for them.
So it's like our ego gets more involved
Totally.
when the stakes are higher.
Exactly. And I think being aware of those reactions can help us manage our emotions
Right.
and support the people we care about even when they're succeeding.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
And there's another interesting point that Gavriliuk makes about self-presentation.
What's that?
He says it's not always conscious.
Really? So sometimes we're shaping our image without even realizing it.
That's right. He talks about the role of scripts in guiding our behavior.
Scripts, like lines in a play.
In a way, yes. So he describes them as these kind of mental patterns
Okay.
that dictate our actions in specific situations.
So it's like we're just on autopilot, following this predetermined script.
Exactly. And he gives the example of like a man encountering a beautiful woman.
Okay.
This might trigger a romantic pursuit script, right?
Oh.
Leading him to act charming and attentive, even if he's normally quite reserved.
So it's like his behavior is driven by this subconscious script
Total.
that's activated by the situation.
Exactly. And these scripts can be incredibly powerful in shaping how we present ourselves.
Yeah.
Even when we're not consciously aware of them.
It makes you wonder how much of our behavior is actually spontaneous
Right.
versus guided by these ingrained social scripts.
It's a fascinating question, and one that we'll actually continue to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, this is getting more and more intriguing. All right, so welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
We're still unpacking all the goodness in Social Cognition by Ellen Gavriliuk.
Yeah, there's so much in this book.
And today I think we should kind of get into like the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Like what happens when things go wrong?
You mean like when our self-presentation hits a snag?
Yeah, like when we need to do some damage control.
That's a great way to put it. Gavriliuk calls these barriers to self-presentation.
Oh, okay.
And he outlines some really fascinating strategies that we use to navigate those challenges.
So what kind of barriers are we talking about?
Well, anything that basically threatens the image that we want to project, right?
Okay.
Or disrupts our social interactions.
Okay.
So think about making a mistake at work,
Oh, yeah.
having an awkward encounter,
Right.
receiving negative feedback.
So it's like your ego's defense mechanism kicks in
Totally.
to protect you from embarrassment.
Exactly. And Gavriliuk outlines several tactics, some more genuine than others, that we might use in these situations.
Okay, so what's like a classic example?
Well, one common one is making excuses.
Ah, the classic excuse.
Right. It wasn't my fault.
Right, I didn't have enough time.
My dog ate my homework.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. And so by blaming these external factors, we're trying to distance ourselves from the responsibility, right?
Yeah, protect that self-image.
Exactly. And he says that it can actually be quite effective
Really?
in reducing social penalties and maintaining our self-esteem.
So there's a strategy to making excuses.
There is, but Gavrilyuk also cautions that excuses really only work if they're believable
Right.
and not overused.
Yeah, because if you're constantly making excuses,
Right.
people are going to start to think that you're not very reliable,
Exactly.
not very accountable.
And then another tactic that he discusses is self-handicapping.
Well, we touched on this a little bit earlier.
We did.
It's that self-sabotaging behavior
Right.
where you create obstacles for yourself.
Totally.
So you have an excuse if you fail.
Exactly. So like intentionally procrastinating on a project,
Oh, yeah.
staying out late, partying the night before a big presentation.
Yeah, if things go bad,
Right.
then you can blame it on that.
Exactly. You can blame it on your lack of preparation rather than your lack of ability.
Yeah, and I could see how that's tempting.
It's super tempting, especially in high-pressure situations.
Totally, yeah.
Because it protects our ego in the short term.
Right.
But Gavrilyuk points out it can become this vicious cycle,
Okay.
leading to decreased performance and reinforcing those negative self-beliefs.
So while it might provide like temporary relief,
Right.
it's ultimately undermining your chances of success.
Exactly. That's a great way to sum it up.
Okay.
Another strategy that he highlights is redefining the situation.
So this is where you kind of try to spin things in a positive light.
Exactly. So someone might downplay the severity of their actions.
Okay.
They might argue that, the violated norm was unreasonable.
Yeah.
Or even claim they were acting on some higher moral principle.
It's all about reframing the narrative
Totally.
to make yourself look better.
Exactly. But this can obviously backfire, right?
Yeah, if it seems like disingenuous
Right.
or inauthentic, it could actually damage your credibility.
Absolutely. And so Gavrilyuk emphasizes that, of all these tactics that we've talked about, probably the most honest and effective way to address these self-presentation mishaps
Oh, interesting.
is by simply expressing regret.
So acknowledging your mistakes.
Yes, taking responsibility.
And owning up to them.
Exactly. And he suggests that, sincere regret can be much more intractable than any excuse or justification because it shows self-awareness.
Right.
And a willingness to learn.
So you're showing that you're committed to personal growth.
Exactly. And in doing so, you can actually restore trust and strengthen those relationships.
Man, this has been such a good conversation.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really
it really highlights the power of understanding these processes, right?
Absolutely. And I think, Gavrilyuk, he gives us such a valuable framework for navigating all this stuff.
Totally.
And ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, how do we present ourselves in a way that feels authentic,
Right.
but also allows us to achieve our goals?
Exactly. And how do we maintain that positive self-image while also being open to growth and feedback?
Yeah, because I think, we've all experienced those moments where we feel like we're putting on a mask.
Right.
Or we're trying to be someone that we're not.
Totally.
And it's exhausting.
It's exhausting, and it can really take a toll on our well-being.
So I think this conversation has been really helpful in kind of unpacking all of that.
Yeah, I agree.
And giving us some tools to navigate those challenges in a more authentic way.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to break all this down.
Of course, it's been my pleasure.
Yeah, this has been awesome. And for all of you listening out there,
Keep those mirrors clean.
yeah, keep those mirrors clean.
So you can see your true self.
And until next time, thanks for joining us.
Take care.